An antique family ring appears in an unexpected place, triggering an investigation that uncovers decades of hidden connections. Within hospital archives, old records emerge to challenge everything wealth tried to bury. Between precious metal and precious truth lies a story that proves some circles are meant to be unbroken. As medical documentation surfaces, destiny claims its due. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Alara traced the strange symbols etched into the antique ring, a dull ache settling in her chest. The attic's musty scent, a mix of dried lavender and forgotten things, did little to soothe her anxiety. Inherited from her estranged grandmother, the ring felt less like a precious heirloom and more like a cryptic puzzle. Sunlight, filtering through cracks in the boarded-up window, illuminated the intricate carvings, their meaning utterly lost to her. "Grandma always was secretive," she murmured, the words a fragile whisper in the stillness. Her life, a whirlwind of half-finished paintings and overdue rent, hadn't exactly been a bed of roses. The art world felt like a cruel mistress, demanding unwavering devotion while offering little in return. The relationship with her grandmother, fractured by years of silence and unspoken resentments, hung heavy in the air, a phantom limb of a life she never truly understood. This ring, a tangible link to that complicated past, felt both exciting and terrifying. The heavy oak door creaked shut behind her as she descended the attic stairs, the ring a cold weight in her pocket. The anticipation, initially tinged with a thrill of discovery, now morphed into a knot of apprehension. What secrets did this seemingly ordinary ring hold? What truths, buried beneath layers of family history, were about to be unearthed? The ring, cold against her skin, felt like a promise of answers, and perhaps a promise of more pain. The journey had begun, and Alara, armed only with her artistic intuition and a growing sense of unease, was ready to face whatever awaited her. The hospital's imposing facade loomed, a cold gray monolith against the bruised twilight sky. Alara shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter. The ring, nestled in her palm, felt strangely warm against her chilled skin, a counterpoint to the icy apprehension gripping her. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and old paper, a scent that both repelled and strangely fascinated her. "I'm here to see about some old records," Alara told the receptionist, her voice slightly shaky. The woman, her expression as bland as the institutional walls, barely looked up from her computer. "Name? Alara Vance." The name felt foreign on her tongue, a connection to a past she barely understood. The receptionist tapped away, her movements precise and efficient. A curt nod was her only response. Alara felt a familiar wave of frustration. This wasn't how she imagined this part of her journey unfolding. She envisioned a sympathetic archivist, eager to unravel the mystery of her grandmother's ring, not a wall of bureaucratic indifference. Hours later, after navigating a labyrinthine corridor that seemed to stretch into eternity, Alara finally stood before a heavy oak door. A nameplate, barely legible beneath layers of dust, read, "Liam O'Connell, Archivist." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the brass knob, a mix of trepidation and hope fluttering in her chest. The weight of expectation, the possibility of answers, felt almost unbearable. She took a deep breath and knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Liam's gaze settled on the antique ring peeking from Alara's pocket. A flicker of recognition, of shared intrigue, passed between them. "Alara Vance?" His voice was soft, reassuring. "Please come in. I've been expecting you." His smile broadened, a warmth emanating from him that cut through the hospital's sterile chill. He gestured to a worn armchair beside a towering stack of files. The air in his office was different, warmer, imbued with the scent of old books and a faint hint of coffee. Here, amidst the comforting chaos of carefully preserved history, Alara felt a sense of relief, a glimmer of hope piercing the darkness. This wasn't just a quest for information. It was the beginning of a connection, a shared journey into the unknown. The ring, still warm against her skin, no longer felt like a burden, but a key. Liam's office, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the hospital archives, was a haven of comforting chaos. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the grimy window, illuminating shelves stacked high with ancient medical texts and brittle photographs. The air smelled of aged paper, leather-bound books, and faintly, of coffee, a comforting aroma in stark contrast to the sterile scent of the hospital corridors. Alara, still clutching the ring, felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was different. This felt safe. So, Liam began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the quiet hum of the building. "Tell me about the ring." Alara hesitated, tracing the cryptic markings etched into the gold with a trembling finger. "It belonged to my grandmother," she started, her voice catching slightly. "Alara Blackwood. We weren't close. She was distant." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Estranged, cold, unloving. Liam listened patiently, his kind eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight of a nearby desk lamp. He offered her a steaming mug of chamomile tea, the warmth spreading through her chilled hands. "Distance can hide a lot of things," he murmured, his gaze lingering on the ring. "It's more than just distance," Alara confessed, her voice breaking. "It's secrets. I feel like she's trying to tell me something. From beyond the grave." She showed him the markings, intricate symbols that looked both ancient and unsettlingly modern. Liam leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These are unusual. They aren't anything I recognize from standard heraldic markings." He traced the symbols with a slender finger, his touch surprisingly gentle. "But I have some old grimoires in the back. Might be something there." He disappeared into a shadowy alcove behind his desk, returning moments later with a heavy, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The musty scent of its ancient pages filled the air. The crackle of turning pages broke the silence as Liam searched, his lips moving silently as he read. He paused, a sudden light dawning in his eyes. "This is it," he breathed, pointing to a faded illustration eerily similar to the markings on Alara's ring. A symbol associated with the Blackwood family. But this specific variation, I've never seen it before. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach, the comforting warmth of the tea replaced by a rising tide of unease. This wasn't just about a family heirloom. This was about something far deeper, far more unsettling than she had ever imagined. The initial hope, the relief of finding someone who understood, was fading, replaced by a chilling premonition. The weight of untold secrets, the possibility of a family history far darker than she ever dared to imagine, settled heavily upon her shoulders. The ring, once a symbol of a distant grandmother, now felt like a heavy burden, a key to a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. Liam's fingers, tracing the faded illustration, paused. The air in his small office, usually comforting, now felt thick with unspoken tension. The scent of old paper and coffee was overwhelmed by the metallic tang of fear that prickled Alara's skin. The warmth of the chamomile tea had long since gone cold in her hand. "This symbol," Liam murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a variation of the Blackwood crest, but this extra element, it suggests a branch of the family, a hidden lineage." He pointed to a small, almost imperceptible detail within the larger symbol, a single, subtly curved line. Alara stared, her breath catching in her throat. The ring, nestled in her palm, felt suddenly heavy, a weight of untold generations pressing down on her. The initial hope, the fragile relief she'd felt in Liam's presence, shattered like brittle glass. She felt a cold dread creep into her heart, a chilling premonition of something deeply unsettling. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The clock, a relic from a bygone era, seemed to mock her with its steady, relentless beat, counting down to an unknown future. Liam hesitated, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. The gentle light of his desk lamp cast shadows on his worried face, highlighting the deep lines etched around his eyes, lines that spoke of years spent poring over dusty archives, deciphering forgotten histories. It suggests a separation, a deliberate concealment, as if a branch of the family was disowned, erased. His gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and intrigue. This isn't just about a family heirloom, Elara. This points to something far more significant, something they went to great lengths to hide. A shiver ran down Elara's spine. The comforting familiarity of Liam's office vanished, replaced by an oppressive sense of foreboding. The weight of her family's hidden past bore down on her, heavy and suffocating. She thought of her grandmother, the woman she barely knew, the woman who had left this cryptic symbol, this legacy of secrets, behind. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "My grandmother," she began, her voice thick with unshed tears. She never spoke of her family, only of her art, but even that felt distant, incomplete. The vibrant colors of her own art suddenly seemed pale and lifeless in comparison to the darkness now enveloping her. Liam reached across the desk, his hand gently covering hers. His touch was warm, reassuring, a beacon in the swirling darkness of her newfound fear. "We'll find out," he promised, his voice firm and steady. "Together, we'll unravel this mystery, one piece at a time." The weight of the ring, the weight of her family's secrets, remained. But now, in Liam's steady gaze, in the warmth of his hand, Elara found a flicker of hope, a fragile ember in the encroaching night. The investigation had just begun, and the path ahead was shrouded in shadows. But she was not alone. The hospital's archives felt like a mausoleum, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. Rows upon rows of metal cabinets loomed, their surfaces scarred with the passage of time. Elara shivered, not entirely from the chill emanating from the aged stone walls. Liam, ever the reassuring presence, placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Don't worry," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence. "We'll find something. We have to." His words, though intended to soothe, only amplified her unease. The initial thrill of discovery had long since evaporated, replaced by a gnawing dread. The ring, heavy in her pocket, felt like a tangible link to a past she never knew, a past that seemed determined to reveal its secrets only in fragments. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive quiet. The rhythmic tick-tock of a distant clock punctuated the silence, each beat a hammer blow against Elara's growing anxiety. Liam consulted a faded index card, his brow furrowed in concentration. The brittle paper crackled under his touch, a sound that mirrored the fragility of her hope. "Here it is," he announced, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. He pulled out a file, its edges frayed and brittle, the cover barely clinging to its contents. The hospital's logo, a faded emblem of a winged serpent, seemed to mock their efforts. Elara's heart pounded against her ribs. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the file. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed pages, was a photograph. A young woman, strikingly similar to Elara, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Elara's own growing fear. The inscription below, barely legible, read, "Amelia Blackwood, patient file, 1958. A wave of nausea washed over Elara. Amelia Blackwood, her grandmother. The name, whispered on the breeze of the past, resonated with a chilling certainty. The partially burned edges of the file spoke of a deliberate attempt at concealment, a dark secret buried beneath layers of time and official indifference. The air felt thick, suffocating, the silence now charged with unspoken horrors. The scent of dust and decay sharpened, turning acrid in her nostrils, a physical manifestation of the truth beginning to unfurl before her eyes. Liam's concerned gaze mirrored her own rising terror. This wasn't just a family mystery anymore. It was a conspiracy, a web of deceit that extended far beyond the confines of this ancient hospital. The brittle file felt like crumbling bone in Elara's trembling hands. The photograph, a ghost of a woman with Elara's eyes, stared back with a haunting sadness. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the archive's gloom, illuminating the charred edges of the file like a gruesome wound. "Amelia Blackwood," Liam whispered, his voice hushed, reverent. The name echoed in the silence, heavy with unspoken tragedy. Alara swallowed, the lump in her throat a physical manifestation of her growing fear. The faded inscription, "Patient File, 1958, felt like a cold hand gripping her heart. It wasn't just a family mystery anymore. It was a deliberate, chilling erasure, a cover-up. Liam gently touched her arm, his touch surprisingly strong, grounding her in the suffocating reality. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low and steady, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of Alara's pounding heart. This is bigger than we thought." Alara nodded, unable to speak, her gaze fixed on the photograph. The woman's eyes, so like her own, held a depth of sorrow that resonated deep within her soul. A shared sorrow, a legacy of pain she hadn't known existed. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief, not just for a woman she never met, but for the stolen history, the untold story that had haunted her family for generations. "What do we do now?" Alara finally managed, her voice barely a breath. The weight of the discovery pressed down on her, suffocating her with its implications. She felt Liam's hand tighten on her arm, a silent promise of support in the face of overwhelming fear. Liam's gaze scanned the ravaged document. "We follow the clues," he replied, his voice firm despite the tremor in his own hand. "We find out what happened to Amelia Blackwood, and we find out why someone went to such lengths to destroy this file." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And we do it together." His words, a simple reassurance, were a lifeline in the storm of fear and uncertainty that raged within her. The scent of old paper and decay no longer felt oppressive, but rather a challenge, a testament to the resilience of truth. The journey ahead was terrifying. Yes, but she was not alone. They would face it together. The shared gaze, a bond forged in the heart of a hidden, terrible truth, hinted at the strength their partnership would need. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed, a counterpoint to the hushed reverence of the archive. Dust motes danced in the pale light, illuminating the fragility of the partially burned file like fallen stars. Alara traced the charred edges with a trembling fingertip, the heat of the past radiating from the brittle paper. The scent of aged paper and decay filled her nostrils, a physical manifestation of the secrets it held. Liam, ever watchful, sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers, a silent anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Amelia?" Alara whispered, the name a prayer on her lips, a bridge to a woman she'd never known. The photograph, tucked within the file's ravaged remains, showed a woman with Alara's eyes, the same stubborn set of her jaw, the same hint of defiance in her gaze. But the eyes held a haunting sadness, a depth of sorrow that pierced Alara's heart. A shared sorrow, a legacy of pain stretching across generations. "This wasn't an accident," Liam murmured, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the stillness. He pointed to a meticulous pattern in the burn marks, almost too precise to be accidental. "Someone wanted this destroyed. Completely." A wave of nausea washed over Alara. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a chilling certainty. This wasn't just a family mystery. It was a deliberate act of concealment, a conspiracy woven into the fabric of her family's history. The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating her with its implications. "Why?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fear and a desperate need for answers. Liam's expression was grim. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his weariness evident. "We need to find out who held the power to do this, and what they were so desperately trying to hide." He looked at Alara, his gaze softening. "We'll find out together, Alara. I promise you that." His words, a simple promise, were a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her emotions. The fear remained, sharp and cold, but it was tempered now with a burgeoning resolve. A shared resolve. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey into the darkness. The scent of decay, once suffocating, now felt like a challenge, a testament to the enduring power of truth. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she would walk it, with Liam by her side. The brittle file, the haunting photograph, the charred edges, they were not just remnants of a forgotten past, but a call to action, a promise of justice yet to be served. The journey had just begun. The archive's air, thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, felt heavy on Alara's lungs. Liam, sensing her distress, gently squeezed her hand. His touch, a quiet strength amidst the chaos of unearthed secrets, offered a fragile comfort. She looked at the photograph again, Amelia, her grandmother, her eyes mirroring Alara's own stubborn spirit, yet etched with a profound sadness that transcended time. "It's like looking at a ghost of myself," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. The weight of unspoken history pressed down on her, a suffocating blanket woven from unanswered questions and decades of silence. Liam nodded, his gaze lingering on the image. "Amelia, she was fighting something," he murmured, tracing the faint lines of the photograph with a careful finger. "And someone wanted to make sure that fight, and everything she fought for, was erased." A bitter laugh escaped Alara. Erased, like they tried to erase her from existence. She felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, burning away the initial shock. This wasn't just about a family secret anymore. This was about deliberate erasure, a systematic silencing of a woman's life, a woman's pain. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh hum a jarring counterpoint to the quiet intensity of their shared grief. Alara stood, needing to move, needing to break the suffocating stillness. She paced the small archive room, the worn wooden floorboards creaking under her weight. "We need to find out who," she said, her voice regaining its strength, fueled by anger and determination. Who had the power to do this? Who had the motive? And what were they hiding? Liam rose to stand beside her, his hand finding hers again. His touch was a grounding force, anchoring her in the present amidst the swirling vortex of the past. "We'll start with the hospital," he said, his voice firm. "Their records, they're not all digital. There's a lot hidden away, things they'd rather not have discovered." He paused, a thoughtful furrow in his brow. "There's something else. The burn pattern is almost symbolic, like a deliberate message coded into the destruction itself." The implications hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition of the depths they were about to plumb. The journey ahead was perilous, fraught with danger, but Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she wouldn't back down. She wouldn't let her grandmother's story, her grandmother's pain, be erased. Not anymore. This was a fight she was ready to wage, with Liam beside her, their hands clasped together, a silent promise of solidarity echoing in the hushed quiet of the archive. The air hung heavy with the scent of old paper and disinfectant, a peculiar perfume unique to the hospital's archives. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the gloom, illuminating Liam's thoughtful frown. He traced a finger across a faded photograph of a young woman, Alara's grandmother, Amelia, her eyes holding a fierce, untamed spark. This isn't just negligence," Liam said, his voice low, the words hanging in the hushed space. "This is calculated." Alara, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, stared at the partially burned medical file. The edges, brittle and charred, whispered of a deliberate act, a silencing of truth. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring the already faded ink. "They wanted to erase her," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. "Erase her story, her pain?" Liam's gaze softened, his hand reaching across the worn wooden table to gently cover hers. The warmth of his touch was a grounding force, a comforting presence amidst the turmoil. "We won't let them," he murmured, his voice firm despite the tremor in his own heart. He knew the risks involved, the potential backlash from exposing a family steeped in wealth and power, a family whose secrets reached far beyond the confines of this dusty archive. But the sight of Alara's heartbroken vulnerability ignited a fire within him, a stubborn refusal to let another life be so casually dismissed. He continued, his voice gaining strength. "We need to piece this together. The burn pattern. It's not random. Look at the dates. They're meticulously chosen. Someone knew exactly what they were destroying." He pointed to a barely legible date, circled in frantic ink. This precedes the official records of her miscarriage. What if it wasn't a miscarriage? Alara shivered, a cold dread creeping down her spine. The possibility hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a deliberate act, a cover-up, a secret far darker than she'd ever imagined. The weight of her grandmother's untold suffering pressed down upon her, heavy and crushing. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a betrayal of epic proportions. Liam leaned closer, his voice a low rumble. "We're going to find out what happened to Amelia, and we're going to make sure the truth sees the light of day." His words were a promise, a vow etched in quiet determination, a beacon of hope amidst the storm of unanswered questions. The journey ahead loomed, uncertain and fraught with danger, but hand in hand, they would face it together. The fight had just begun. The archive's musty air clung to Alara like a shroud. The scent of aged paper and dust mingled with the faint antiseptic tang of the hospital, a constant reminder of the unsettling truth they were unearthing. Liam's quiet intensity was a comfort amidst the growing unease. He tapped a finger against the brittle edges of the partially burned file, his brow furrowed in concentration. "See this scorch mark? It's deliberate, almost surgical in its precision." Alara shivered, pulling her thin cardigan tighter. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, dancing shadows across the worn wooden table, making the room feel claustrophobic, amplifying the weight of their discovery. "It's like they wanted to erase her completely," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. The image of her grandmother, a woman she barely knew, haunted her, a vibrant, spirited woman reduced to a smudge of ash and faded ink. Liam's hand rested over hers, his touch gentle but firm. The simple act of physical connection was a lifeline, anchoring her in the present, pulling her back from the abyss of her grief and growing fear. "They tried," he said, his voice a low, steady counterpoint to her trembling breath. "But they didn't succeed. We have these fragments." Alara pushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle, grounding. "This changes everything," he murmured, his voice low. "It confirms everything," Alara whispered, her voice raw with emotion. The revelation wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a seismic shift in her understanding of her family, her identity. The fear she'd felt earlier was replaced by a cold, hard anger. The ring on her finger felt cold against her skin, a stark reminder of the manipulation and deceit woven into the fabric of her family's history. Julian's looming threat hung heavy in the air between them. His attempts to dissuade them hadn't been mere intimidation. They'd been thinly veiled warnings, punctuated with subtle threats against Liam's job and Alara's safety. The thought sent a fresh wave of icy dread through Alara, but it was quickly overshadowed by the burning need for justice. "We need a plan," Liam said, his voice firm despite the shadow of worry in his eyes. He stood, the movement breaking the heavy silence that had settled over them. He walked to the window, the cityscape stretching before them like a vast, indifferent canvas. "We can't do this alone." Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline. The weight of Isabel's story and the potential risks pressed heavily upon her. But the fear was finally yielding to a powerful surge of determination. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but she was no longer alone. Liam stood beside her, a bulwark against the storm, and the ring, a symbol of a family's hidden past, was now a weapon in her fight for truth. The fight had begun. The stale air of the archive hung heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams. Alara felt Liam's hand brush hers, a silent reassurance in the face of the monumental revelation. The birth certificate, a flimsy testament to a hidden life, trembled in her grip. Outside, the city thrummed, a chaotic symphony indifferent to their quiet turmoil. "Isabel," Alara whispered, the name a fragile echo in the hushed space. The image on the faded document, a younger, vibrant Isabel Vance, stared back, a haunting mirror to Alara's own features. The uncanny resemblance struck a chord of profound sadness, a loss she hadn't known existed. Liam's arm encircled her shoulders, a comforting weight against the rising tide of her emotions. "It explains so much," he murmured, his voice a soft counterpoint to the chaotic storm brewing inside her. He understood the weight of this discovery, the shattering of her carefully constructed reality. Julian's threats echoed in the silence between them, a chilling reminder of the power they were challenging. The comfortable camaraderie of the archives felt suddenly fragile, vulnerable. The potential cost of their investigation, Liam's job, Alara's safety loomed large, tangible specters in the dim light. "He won't stop," Alara said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and steely resolve. The fear was present, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination, a burning desire for truth. This wasn't just about her grandmother anymore. It was about justice, about unearthing the buried secrets that poisoned her family's history. Liam's grip tightened. "We'll be careful," he said, his voice firm but laced with concern. His gaze, usually warm and playful, held a new seriousness, the weight of their shared predicament etched into his features. He was ready to fight, but the fear for Alara was evident, unspoken yet palpable. "Careful isn't enough," Alara countered, her voice raw with a newfound anger. The quiet determination had blossomed into something fiery, relentless. The ring on her finger, a cold weight of inherited secrets, felt suddenly like a symbol of her defiance. "We need a plan, and we need allies." The city outside, once a distant hum, now felt like a potential battleground, a landscape teeming with both danger and hope. The fight for truth had begun, and Alara, armed with a newfound strength and the unwavering support of Liam, was ready. The fluorescent lights of the archive hummed, a counterpoint to the frantic beating of Alara's heart. The birth certificate, crisp and official despite its age, felt like a burning brand in her hand. Isabel Vance. The name, a whisper from a forgotten past, resonated with a painful familiarity. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the grimy window, illuminating the faded photograph, a younger Isabel, her eyes mirroring Alara's own defiant spirit. Liam, sensing her distress, gently took her hand. His touch was a grounding force, a silent promise of support in the face of this overwhelming revelation. "We need to think," he said, his voice low and reassuring. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the scent of aged paper and forgotten sorrows. Alara swallowed, the lump in her throat a physical manifestation of her fear. "Julian, he'll stop at nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The memory of his chilling threats, his cold, calculating gaze, sent a shiver down her spine. The comfortable sanctuary of the archives felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable. Liam's expression hardened. "We can't let him," he stated, his voice firm, laced with a determination that mirrored her own. He stood, pulling Alara with him, their hands intertwined, a silent pact of solidarity forged in the face of adversity. They walked in silence for a moment, the rhythmic tap of their footsteps against the worn linoleum floor the only sound. The weight of their secret, the knowledge of a hidden family history, pressed down on them both. "We need to find others," Alara said, finally breaking the silence. A glimmer of hope, fragile yet persistent, sparked in her eyes. Others who might know, others who might have been silenced. The idea, bold and risky, held the promise of breaking Julian's stranglehold on the truth. Liam nodded, his gaze resolute. "We start with the hospital records. There has to be more than these fragmented pieces." He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the enormity of the task ahead, the potential dangers lurking in the shadows. The city outside, once a comforting backdrop, now seemed a menacing labyrinth of secrets and potential betrayals. Their fight for the truth had begun, and the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. The musty scent of aged paper and dust clung to Alara's clothes as she and Liam left the archives. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows of the taxi, mirroring the confusion swirling in her mind. Isabel Vance. The name, a tangible link to a past she never knew, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "It's a lot to take in," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the cab roof. She clutched the birth certificate, its crispness a stark contrast to the trembling in her hands. Liam squeezed her hand, his touch a comforting anchor in the storm of her emotions. "We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." His voice was calm, reassuring, yet a shadow of worry darkened his eyes. He knew this discovery was more than just a genealogical quirk. It was a key that unlocked a Pandora's box of secrets Julian would fiercely protect. The taxi pulled up to Alara's small apartment, the muted glow of the street lamp highlighting the rain-slicked street. The cozy interior felt jarringly peaceful after the tense atmosphere of the archives. Alara sank onto the worn sofa, the birth certificate still clutched in her hand. "What if this is a trap?" she murmured, her voice laced with apprehension. "What if Julian is somehow behind this, making us believe there's a sibling to distract us?" Liam sat beside her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "We'll verify everything. We'll cross-reference the records, trace the family lines. We won't jump to conclusions." He reached out, gently taking the birth certificate from her numb fingers. "Let's focus on what we do know. Isabel Vance existed. She was your grandmother's sister, and she had a child." A wave of nausea washed over Alara. The implications were staggering. A family history rewritten. A life she barely understood suddenly teeming with possibilities, and perhaps equally terrifying realities. The comforting scent of lavender from her grandmother's old potpourri suddenly felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the growing unease in her heart. She had unearthed a truth, but it was a truth that threatened to consume her. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, a heavy cloak of uncertainty shrouding their fragile hope. The fight had only just begun. The sterile scent of antiseptic still clung to Alara's clothes, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of her tiny apartment. Rain lashed against the window panes, mimicking the storm brewing inside her. Liam, ever the pragmatist, was already at the small kitchen table, spreading out the birth certificate alongside other documents he'd painstakingly copied from the archives. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows, turning familiar objects into strange, menacing shapes. "Isabel Vance?" Alara repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. The fragility of the paper felt symbolic of the delicate balance of her life, now teetering on the precipice of a revelation that could shatter everything. Liam looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "I've cross-referenced the hospital records with census data. Isabel's birth and marriage certificates are consistent. There's no record of her death, however. It's as though she vanished." Alara shivered, pulling her worn cardigan tighter. The thought of a hidden sibling, a life lived in secrecy, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, suffocating her with uncertainty. "What if Julian orchestrated this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if this Isabel is a phantom, a carefully constructed lie designed to mislead us?" Liam's hand rested briefly on hers, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. "We'll verify everything, but the birth certificate is genuine. The hospital records, they're consistent with other evidence we found. We need to consider the possibility that this isn't a trap, Alara, that there's a real person out there." He picked up a faded photograph, showing a young woman with Alara's grandmother's eyes, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. The picture exuded an unspoken sadness, a life lived on the edge of happiness. A shadow of despair crossed Liam's face. This is a whole other level. A family history hidden beneath layers of wealth and deceit. Alara stared at the photo, a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. The thought of a hidden family, a life she could have shared, was overwhelming. The lavender-scented potpourri, a comforting presence before, now felt heavy and suffocating, a symbol of the buried truths she'd unearthed. The comfortable silence of her apartment felt oppressive, a stark contrast to the urgency building in her heart. The ring, nestled in her pocket, felt cold and heavy, a constant reminder of the journey she had begun, a journey with unknown perils and unforeseen destinations. The fight, as Liam had said, had only just begun. The musty scent of aged paper filled the archives, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital corridors they just left. Alara traced a finger along the brittle edge of the birth certificate, the faded ink threatening to crumble beneath her touch. Liam, hunched over a microfilm reader, murmured something about inconsistencies in hospital records from the 1950s. The lamplight cast harsh shadows across their faces, highlighting the fatigue etched into their features. Isabel Vance, Alara whispered again, the name a fragile bridge to a past she barely understood. The weight of the secret, the potential upheaval of her life, pressed down on her like a physical burden. She felt a tremor of excitement, a flicker of hope mingled with a deep-seated fear. A sister? A family she never knew existed? Liam switched off the reader, the sudden silence amplifying the tension in the room. He looked at Alara, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. The discrepancies are significant, Alara. Missing entries, deliberately obscured files. It's more than just negligence. He slid a photograph across the table, a sepia-toned image of a young woman with Alara's grandmother's eyes. The woman's smile was wistful, tinged with a melancholic beauty that mirrored Alara's own apprehension. She looks familiar, Alara breathed, a strange sense of kinship washing over her. The feeling was both comforting and unsettling, a ghostly echo of a connection she had never known. Julian's been meticulous, Liam continued, his voice low, but he's missed something. This wasn't a perfect cover-up. There are gaps, inconsistencies. We just need to find the right pieces to fit them together. He tapped a finger on a faded hospital ledger, its pages yellowed with age and filled with spidery handwriting. These records detail unusual pregnancies, miscarriages, things that don't quite add up. And there are several instances of births with incomplete documentation. Alara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The whispers of a darker, more sinister truth reached her. A truth hidden behind layers of wealth and deception. The comfortable certainty of her life had crumbled, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. She looked at the photograph again, the young woman's face a mirror reflecting her own turbulent emotions. The ring, a cold weight in her pocket, seemed to pulse with a silent energy, a tangible link to a past she was only beginning to understand. The fight, as Liam had said, had only just begun, and the stakes were far higher than she could have ever imagined. The mahogany table in Julian's opulent office felt cold beneath Alara's palms. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and expensive cigars, hung heavy with unspoken accusations. Julian, impeccably dressed as always, leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. "So, Miss Vance," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble, "you've unearthed a few dusty secrets. Impressive, for a struggling artist." Alara met his gaze, her anger a simmering fire beneath her carefully controlled composure. "Secrets your family has worked hard to bury," she countered, her voice low but firm. The birth certificate felt like a weapon in her pocket, a tangible piece of evidence against his carefully constructed facade. "My grandmother's suffering? It wasn't an accident, was it?" Julian chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Accidents happen, Miss Vance, especially in families with complicated histories." He steepled his fingers, his eyes glittering with a cold, calculating light. "Your grandmother was a difficult woman, prone to exaggeration." "Exaggeration?" Alara's voice rose, the carefully constructed dam of her composure beginning to crack. "She died broken-hearted, Julian, and now I'm discovering why. The missing records, the altered documents, it all points to a deliberate cover-up." A wave of nausea washed over her, the weight of the truth pressing down with suffocating intensity. Julian's smile faltered. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some things are better left undisturbed, Miss Vance. For the sake of your own well-being. For the sake of your family's reputation." He paused, his gaze piercing. "This isn't a game you can win. This isn't about winning, Julian." Alara spat, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "It's about the truth. About justice." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. The scent of expensive perfume suddenly felt suffocating. "And I won't stop until I find it." She turned, her back to him, a fierce determination hardening her resolve. The fight, she realized, had only just begun, and it was a fight she was prepared to face, alone if necessary. The weight of her grandmother's untold suffering was her fuel. The cold certainty of a hidden truth was her weapon. Leaving the imposing office, she felt the biting wind, a welcome relief against the stifling atmosphere of deceit she just left behind. The streetlights blurred through her unshed tears. The fight was far from over. The biting wind whipped Alara's hair across her face as she stumbled out of Julian's office, the polished mahogany door slamming shut behind her like a final judgment. The city lights blurred through a sudden onslaught of tears, each one a tiny, burning testament to her grandmother's untold suffering. The weight of the truth pressed down, a physical ache in her chest. Julian's words echoed in her ears. Some things are better left undisturbed. But how could she leave her grandmother's memory buried beneath layers of lies and deceit? She pulled her coat tighter, the cheap wool offering little comfort against the chill seeping into her bones. The scent of exhaust fumes and damp pavement battled with the lingering cloying sweetness of Julian's expensive perfume, a nauseating reminder of the opulent world that had concealed such darkness. A sob escaped her lips, ragged and uncontrolled. This wasn't just about a family secret. It was about justice, about a life cut short, a truth deliberately obscured. Reaching a quiet park bench, Alara sank onto the cold metal, the icy chill seeping into her. She pulled out her phone, her fingers clumsy and trembling. Liam. She needed Liam. His calm presence, his unwavering support, was the only anchor in this storm of revelation. She dialed his number, the ringing a sharp counterpoint to the turmoil within her. Liam answered on the third ring, his voice a comforting balm against the raw edges of her despair. "Alara? What's wrong?" "Your voice. It's Julian," she managed, her voice choked with emotion. He admitted to it. The cover-up. He tried to scare me, to make me stop. But I won't. Silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant city sounds. Then Liam's voice, quiet but firm, filled the space. "I knew he wouldn't back down easily. But you're not alone, Alara. We'll face this together." His words were a lifeline, a promise of shared struggle, of unwavering solidarity in the face of overwhelming odds. The weight on her chest seemed to lift, slightly. A small flicker of hope ignited in the darkness. The fight, she knew, was far from over. But now, at least, she wasn't facing it alone. She had Liam, and that made all the difference. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to Alara's clothes, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of the park bench where she'd just sobbed. Liam's voice, still echoing in her ears, was a fragile lifeline in the storm of her emotions. He'd arrived within minutes, his face etched with concern. The dim, yellow light of the hospital lobby cast long shadows, amplifying the sense of foreboding. "He admitted everything?" Alara repeated, her voice barely a whisper, the words catching in her throat. She felt raw, exposed, as if Julian's callous disregard had peeled back layers of her skin. Liam's hand found hers, his touch firm yet gentle. "I believe you, Alara. We need to strategize. We can't just walk away from this." He squeezed her hand, a silent promise of support. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital archive room were a cruel contrast to the comforting warmth of Liam's presence. Dust motes danced in the beams, illuminating the stacks of ancient files. The air hummed with the low thrum of the ancient air conditioning system. Liam, ever practical, pulled up a chair, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's more than just the miscarriage cover-up," Alara said. her voice trembling but regaining strength. He mentioned other deaths, patients, people silenced to protect the family's reputation. The enormity of it hit her again, the weight of those unspoken tragedies pressing down. Liam's eyes widened. This is bigger than we thought. We need to see what else we can find. He scanned the shelves, his gaze searching for something, anything, that could lead them closer to the truth. The ensuing hours were a blur of frantic searching, hushed whispers, and the rustling of fragile papers. The discovery of a series of coded entries in a doctor's personal journal sent a chill down Alara's spine. Each cryptic entry felt like a confirmation of her worst fears, a glimpse into a world of systematic manipulation and callous disregard for human life. "Look at this," Liam breathed, his voice hushed with awe and horror. A photograph, tucked inside the journal, showed a young woman, her face obscured but her resemblance to Alara undeniable. This could be your aunt, the one Julian never mentioned." Alara stared at the picture, her heart pounding in her chest. A wave of nausea washed over her as a profound sense of loss threatened to consume her. Suddenly, the ring on her finger felt heavy, burdened by the weight of the family secrets it had unveiled. It was more than just an heirloom. It was a key, unlocking a Pandora's box of pain and injustice. This was not just her grandmother's story anymore. It was hers, too. The fight for justice had become intensely personal. The fluorescent lights of the archive room buzzed, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of Alara's heart. Dust motes, illuminated by the harsh glare, swirled like tiny, malevolent spirits. Liam, his face pale with a grim determination, sifted through a pile of brittle documents, his fingers tracing the faded ink. The air hung heavy with the scent of old paper and the unspoken weight of their discovery. This is a list of patients," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the building. He held up a yellowed sheet, the edges frayed and brittle. Each name was followed by a series of cryptic symbols, a code that whispered of hushed transactions and concealed truths. Alara leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The chilling implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. These weren't just medical records. They were a ledger of silenced voices, a testament to the family's ruthless pursuit of maintaining their flawless facade. "Julian, he knew," Alara murmured, her voice thick with a rising tide of anger. The revelation was a bitter pill, confirming her worst suspicions. The weight of the family's deceit pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. Liam's hand covered hers, his touch grounding her in the present. "We need to find the key to this code," he said, his voice firm, a bulwark against the storm of her emotions. "Then we can expose them." The unspoken fear hung between them, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they faced. Exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. It would be a battle against a formidable opponent, a fight against an entrenched system of power and deceit. Yet, in the shared gaze, in the quiet strength of their joined hands, a new resolve blossomed. They would face this together. The fight had become personal. Their lives were now inextricably intertwined, bound by a shared quest for justice, a pursuit of truth against the weight of generations of lies. The sterile scent of the archives was no longer a symbol of cold indifference, but a battlefield in their fight for the lost and the silenced. The archive room felt colder now, the fluorescent hum a relentless drone against the silence of their discovery. Alara traced the faded ink on the list, each cryptic symbol a fresh wound. The scent of old paper, once merely musty, now reeked of secrets and betrayal. Liam's hand, still clasped in hers, offered little comfort against the chilling weight of the truth. The names weren't just names. They were whispers of lives lost, of families fractured, all for the sake of maintaining a gilded cage. It's worse than we thought," Alara whispered, her voice cracking. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy family, the one she'd only glimpsed from afar, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The anger, a simmering ember before, now roared to life. Liam squeezed her hand, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. We need to find out what these symbols mean. There has to be a key somewhere in these records. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, the weariness etched onto his face a reflection of the burden they now carried. The fear, once a distant hum, was now a deafening roar. This wasn't just about uncovering a family secret anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond the hospital walls, a web of deceit woven through decades of lies and carefully constructed silences. The thought of confronting Julian, of facing the raw power and influence he wielded, sent a fresh wave of dread washing over Alara. Yet the anger fueled her. She wouldn't back down. Not now. "We won't do this alone," Liam said softly, his voice a quiet anchor in the storm. "We'll find others who were affected. We'll find the truth." His words, though reassuring, carried a heavy undercurrent of anxiety. His job, his future, hung precariously in the balance. But the look in his eyes confirmed his choice. Truth over safety, justice over career. This shared burden, this terrifying responsibility, had forged a bond stronger than either could have anticipated. The fight for truth had become their shared fight for survival. The air crackled with unspoken promises, with the quiet strength of a shared purpose. The weight of the past threatened to crush them, but in that shared moment, a flicker of hope ignited in the bleak shadows of the archive room. The fluorescent lights of the archive room hummed a discordant counterpoint to the frantic thumping of Alara's heart. Dust motes, illuminated in the harsh glare, danced in the still air, mirroring the turmoil within her. Liam, sensing her distress, gently squeezed her hand. His touch, usually comforting, felt strangely inadequate against the avalanche of revelations. The list, a cruel testament to systematic deceit, lay between them, a chilling catalog of names and dates, each entry a tombstone marking a life silenced. They knew, Alara breathed, her voice barely a whisper, the words catching in her throat. The scent of aged paper, once merely a background odor, now felt suffocating, thick with the stench of betrayal. Liam nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on the document. Knew and covered it up. For decades. His own fear was palpable, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He glanced at Alara, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and apprehension. The weight of their discovery pressed down on them, suffocating the air between them. Alara's anger, simmering beneath the surface for days, finally erupted. She slammed her fist on the table, the sound echoing in the stark room, startling a nearby rat scurrying into the shadows. "How could they?" she cried, her voice raw with pain and fury. All that wealth, all that power, used to bury the truth, to silence anyone who got too close. Liam pulled her close, his embrace a silent promise of support. "We have to tell someone," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "This can't stay hidden." The thought of exposing the truth, of confronting Julian and the formidable power he wielded, filled him with dread. Yet, the unwavering conviction in Alara's eyes, the righteous fire burning in her soul, bolstered his own resolve. "But who?" Alara whispered, her fury giving way to a chilling wave of exhaustion. The weight of the conspiracy, the sheer scale of the deception, was almost too much to bear. The carefully constructed world she'd always known, the world of privilege and silence, lay in ruins. The ring on her finger, once a symbol of mystery, now felt like a brand, a mark of a legacy she never chose. The fight ahead loomed, daunting and terrifying. But in Liam's embrace, a fragile spark of hope ignited, a flicker of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. They would fight. They would expose the truth no matter the cost. The fight had begun. The stale air of the archive hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decaying paper. Alara stared at the list, the stark black ink a stark contrast to the brittle, yellowed paper. Each name felt like a punch to the gut, a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. Liam's hand, warm and reassuring, rested on hers, but even his presence couldn't fully quell the rising tide of despair. It's more than just a cover-up," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already faded script. They deliberately silenced anyone who threatened their secret. Liam's jaw tightened. The compassionate archivist he'd been moments ago was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. This isn't just about their family anymore, Illyra. This is about justice. He stood, his chair scraping against the worn floor. We need to contact someone. Someone with the authority to investigate this. The weight of their discovery pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket of fear and anger. The fluorescent lights seemed to mock their vulnerability, their harsh glow highlighting the dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. Illyra felt a strange detachment, as if watching this scene unfold from a distance, a detached observer in her own life. She looked at Liam, his face etched with worry, but his eyes held a fierce determination that mirrored her own nascent strength. Their shared fear forged a bond stronger than any forged in a more comfortable setting. It was a bond built on a shared horror, a shared understanding of the injustice they'd uncovered. But who? Illyra managed, her voice catching in her throat. Trust felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. Every face, every name, felt tainted, suspect. The ring on her finger, a constant, cold reminder of the inherited legacy of deceit and violence, felt heavier than ever. Were rumors? Illyra leaned forward, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Rumors about what? The receptionist's gaze drifted to the window, as if avoiding their eyes. About the Blackwood family. About things that happened here. She looked back at them, a mixture of fear and pity in her eyes. I'd advise you to be careful. Asking too many questions can have consequences. The warning hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The wind outside seemed to moan in agreement. Illyra felt a chill despite the warmth of the building. This wasn't just a quest for information anymore. It felt like they were walking into a nest of vipers. The hunt for Agnes Blackwood had suddenly become a desperate scramble for survival. The receptionist's words hung in the air, thick with unspoken dread. The scent of lilies, once subtly sweet, now felt cloying, suffocating. Illyra's breath hitched. Liam's hand tightened momentarily over hers, a silent reassurance against the growing unease. The old wooden floorboards groaned under their weight as they moved towards the hallway, the sound echoing the tremor in Illyra's heart. Rumors, Liam murmured, his voice low. About what, exactly? Illyra's gaze fell to the faded floral wallpaper, its once vibrant colors now muted and dull, mirroring the draining of hope she felt. The weight of the Blackwood legacy, once a distant curiosity, now pressed down on her with crushing force. The ring, nestled safely in her pocket, felt heavy, a tangible symbol of the burden she carried. They followed the receptionist's hesitant directions, passing rows of closed doors, each one a potential repository of secrets. The air grew colder, a tangible shift in atmosphere as they approached a wing of the building that felt distinctly different, isolated. A musty odor, like damp earth and forgotten things, clung to the air. This section, it's rarely used, the receptionist whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic tick-tock of an ancient grandfather clock. Old records, mostly, and some things better left undisturbed. A chill deeper than the temperature change snaked down Illyra's spine. Liam's expression was serious, his gaze focused on the shadowed hallway ahead. He squeezed Illyra's hand, offering a silent promise of support. The journey wasn't merely about uncovering family secrets anymore. It was a descent into the heart of darkness, a confrontation with truths best left hidden. The approaching door, labeled simply Archive, felt less like a destination and more like a precipice. The fear wasn't just for themselves. It was for the untold stories waiting to be heard, the voices silenced for decades. This wasn't just a quest for answers anymore. It was a fight for justice, a fight for survival. The click of the door opening was the sound of destiny calling. The archive room smelled of dust motes dancing in the slivers of sunlight piercing the grimy windows. Rows upon rows of metal filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels, their surfaces scarred with the passage of time. Illyra ran a trembling hand along a cool, metallic edge, the chill seeping into her bones. Liam, ever watchful, placed a comforting hand on her back. "It's overwhelming," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged paper and forgotten sorrows. Liam nodded, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We'll take it slow. We'll find what we need." His words, though reassuring, held a tremor of his own apprehension. The weight of the Blackwood legacy pressed upon them both, a tangible force in the hushed silence. They began their search, sifting through brittle files, their fingers tracing faded handwriting, names and dates blurring into a tapestry of hidden lives. A photograph, tucked inside a crumbling folder, caught Alara's eye, a young woman with striking resemblance to her grandmother, her face etched with a sadness that mirrored the pain Alara felt now. "This is Aunt Clara?" Alara breathed, her voice laced with a strange mix of recognition and sorrow. The woman in the picture held a small infant, her smile strained, her eyes reflecting a profound weariness. Liam peered over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. The records mentioned a stillbirth around this time. But this photo, Alara felt a tightening in her chest, a cold dread creeping into the warmth of Liam's hand on her back. The infant's face was obscured, but the image radiated an inexplicable sorrow. Something wasn't right. The official story didn't match what was before them, and the unspoken truth hung heavy in the stagnant air, a promise of a far greater and darker revelation. This wasn't just about a hidden branch of the family anymore. This was about a deliberate cover-up, a web of lies spun over decades, protected by wealth and power. The fight for justice had just become far more personal. The grandfather clock chimed, each toll a hammer blow against the fragile hope they had clung to. Their journey into the heart of darkness was only just beginning. The chipped porcelain teacup warmed Alara's hands, a fragile comfort in the chilling reality unfolding before them. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon sun, slanting through the grimy archive window, illuminating the brittle photograph once more. Aunt Clara's haunted eyes seemed to follow Alara's every move. Liam, sensing her distress, gently took the photo, his touch hesitant yet firm. "The infant's face. It's deliberately obscured," he murmured, tracing the blurry lines with his fingertip. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions and the ghost of a long-buried truth. Alara's breath hitched. "Feels intentional, like someone wanted to erase that child from existence." A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm her. The weight of the Blackwood legacy, once a curious puzzle, now felt like a crushing burden. Liam's gaze softened. He slid his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. The warmth of his touch, the steady beat of his heart against hers, offered a fragile anchor in the storm raging within her. "We won't let them erase her, Alara. We'll find out who she was." His words, a simple pledge, ignited a spark of defiance within her. The fear, though still present, was slowly being replaced by a fierce determination. She straightened, her chin lifted. "We need to find more. Anything that connects to this photo, this time period. Every birth, every death, every discrepancy." The next few hours blurred into a relentless search. They unearthed fragmented medical notes, scrawled in elegant cursive script, mentioning complications, hushed whispers of procedures gone wrong, and then nothing. A deliberate void where information should have been. The systematic erasure of a life, or perhaps lives. The grandfather clock chimed, its mournful toll a stark reminder of the passage of time and the weight of the secrets they were unearthing. As shadows lengthened, casting long fingers across the dusty room, a chilling realization dawned upon Alara. This wasn't just about a hidden family branch. It was about a web of deceit, a conspiracy woven over decades, a deliberate silencing of uncomfortable truths protected by generations of Blackwood wealth and influence. The fight for justice had become a deeply personal crusade, a battle for the forgotten and the silenced. And for Alara, it was only just beginning. The faint scent of lavender, a perfume she vaguely remembered from her grandmother's attic, suddenly filled the air, bringing with it a pang of loss and a burning desire for answers. The fight for truth had only just begun. The archive's air, thick with the scent of aging paper and dust, clung to Alara like a shroud. Liam's hand, warm and reassuring, rested on her arm. The fragmented medical notes, painstakingly pieced together, spoke of hushed whispers, complications, and a chillingly vague entry. Unforeseen circumstances. The deliberate omission of details was a deliberate wound, a gaping hole in the fabric of Alara's family history. They tried to erase her, Alara whispered, her voice trembling, more to herself than to Liam. The weight of it, the calculated erasure of a life. A sister she never knew, pressed down on her, a physical burden. Liam squeezed her arm gently. We won't let them. We'll find her. His voice was a steady counterpoint to her inner turmoil, a lifeline in the swirling vortex of doubt and grief. He pointed to a faded ink stain on one of the documents. Look at this. It's lavender-scented ink. The same scent you mentioned from your grandmother's attic. The connection hit Alara like a physical blow. A detail, seemingly insignificant, now held a potent charge of meaning. It was a thread, a tiny link connecting the past to the present, whispering of a deliberate act of concealment, weaving a tapestry of deceit across generations. It's deliberate, Alara breathed, her eyes fixed on the stain. This wasn't an accident. Someone carefully erased these records, and they used a specific type of ink my grandmother might have used. A new fear, colder and sharper than before, pierced through her grief. This wasn't just about a hidden sibling. It was about a systematic cover-up, a conspiracy that reached far beyond the hospital walls, into the very heart of the Blackwood family empire. The wealth, the power, the carefully cultivated image, all were built on a foundation of lies and silenced truths. Liam, his expression grave, nodded slowly. He pulled up another file, this one detailing the financial transactions of the Blackwood Family Hospital around the time period of the obscured birth records. Look at this. Suspiciously large sums transferred to offshore accounts, right around the time the records were altered. The implications were stark. The missing child, the obscured records, the suspicious financial transactions, it all pointed to a deliberate and calculated cover-up, one that involved not just the hospital, but the entirety of the Blackwood family. The fight, once a quest for personal understanding, had morphed into a battle against a formidable and deeply entrenched enemy. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed, its mournful toll echoing Alara's own sense of loss. But within that loss, a new determination flickered. The lavender-scented ink was no longer a symbol of sorrowful memory. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, leading her toward the truth, toward the sister she never knew, and toward the reckoning that awaited the Blackwood family. The fight had only just begun, but for the first time, Alara felt a surge of resolute strength. She would not be silenced. The musty scent of aged paper and antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn air outside. Alara shivered, not entirely from the chill. Liam, sensing her unease, pulled her closer, his warmth a comforting counterpoint to the icy dread that gripped her. They sat amidst a chaotic spread of documents, fragmented medical records, faded photographs, and cryptic financial statements. The weight of the Blackwood family's secrets pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket of deceit. This is worse than we thought, Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic tick-tock of a nearby grandfather clock. Her fingers traced the faint lavender ink on a crumpled document, a ghostly reminder of her grandmother's scent, a deliberate mark of concealment. Liam nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on a ledger detailing suspiciously large sums funneled into offshore accounts. Julian knew. He had to. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a systematic dismantling of any evidence that could expose the truth. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, exhaustion etched onto his face. The fight wasn't just about uncovering a family secret. It was about challenging a powerful and entrenched institution. His own future at the hospital hung precariously in the balance. Alara's eyes, usually sparkling with creative energy, were now filled with a fierce determination. He won't get away with this. Not this time. She picked up a faded photograph, showing a young woman with kind eyes and a familiar smile, her grandmother. The image was jarring, revealing a vulnerability at odds with the cold, calculating woman Alara had known. "They took so much from her," she murmured, a wave of grief washing over her, followed swiftly by a surge of righteous anger. Liam gently took her hand, his touch a silent promise of support. "We won't let them win, Alara. We'll expose them. We have the evidence and we have each other." His words, though simple, held a power that reached beyond the four walls of the archive room, offering a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. The lavender-scented ink, once a symbol of sorrow, now served as a potent reminder of their shared purpose, a trail leading towards justice, towards the truth they were determined to bring to light, no matter the cost. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in days, Alara felt a glimmer of something stronger than fear. Hope, fueled by unwavering determination and the strength of their bond. The weight of the secrets remained, but it no longer felt crushing. It was fuel. The archive room, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, felt suffocating. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of afternoon sun, illuminating the swirling chaos of their investigation. Alara's fingers, stained with the ghostly lavender ink, trembled as she reread a hospital admittance form, her grandmother's name. A chillingly familiar script. Liam, ever the pragmatist, began meticulously organizing the scattered documents, his movements precise, yet his shoulders slumped with weariness. This is a pattern," Liam murmured, his voice low. He pointed to a series of entries, each detailing a similar circumstance, veiled in medical jargon that hinted at something far more sinister. Multiple unexplained miscarriages, all linked to prominent Blackwood family members. And the records, they're deliberately incomplete. Alara looked up, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The weight of the truth, heavier than any physical burden, pressed down on her. The scent of old paper and antiseptic seemed to intensify, mirroring the growing nausea in her stomach. She felt a cold dread creeping into her heart, a chilling realization settling deep within her bones. This wasn't just about her grandmother. This was about a legacy of suffering, systematically hidden behind a facade of wealth and privilege. "They silenced them," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The image of her grandmother, vulnerable and hidden, flashed before her eyes. The anger she'd felt earlier transformed into something deeper, a raw grief that threatened to consume her. Liam reached out, his hand covering hers. His touch, solid and reassuring, grounded her amidst the swirling storm of her emotions. "We won't let them win, Alara," he repeated, his voice firm, yet laced with a fatigue that mirrored her own. "We'll find a way to make them answer for this." He pulled up a chair, pulling her closer, their bodies huddled together for warmth and support amidst the cold, unforgiving reality of the evidence spread before them. The weight of the secrets, the years of concealment, suddenly felt less crushing, shared now, not just as a burden, but as a shared purpose, a fierce determination fueling their fight for justice, for truth. The lavender ink, once a symbol of a hidden past, now marked the beginning of their path forward, a journey toward exposing a dark legacy and finding, perhaps, a measure of peace in the face of profound loss. The fight wasn't over, but the shared strength in their bond pulsed like a lifeline in the cold archive room. The musty scent of aged paper and dust clung to Alara like a second skin. Sunlight, fractured by the grimy window panes, cast long shadows across the archive room, highlighting the swirling chaos of their discovery. Liam, usually a bastion of calm, paced restlessly, his normally sharp features etched with worry. He stopped, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The ring," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's more than just a family heirloom. Look at this." He spread out a series of photographs, faded images of women, strikingly similar to Alara, each bearing a resemblance to her grandmother. Their eyes held a haunting familiarity, a shared weariness that chilled Alara to the bone. They look so sad," she breathed, her voice catching. The weight of their shared discovery pressed down on her, a crushing burden of unspoken grief. A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm her, the scent of antiseptic suddenly sharp and overpowering. Liam gently placed a hand on her arm, his touch a grounding force in the swirling vortex of her emotions. "Ilara," he said softly, his eyes conveying a depth of understanding that transcended words. "It explains the markings, the symbols. They're not just decorative. They're a coded message, a silent scream." Ilara stared at the photographs, a chilling realization dawning. Her grandmother's story wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a dark thread woven through generations of her family. The anger she'd felt earlier gave way to a profound sadness, a deep well of grief for women she'd never known, silenced and forgotten. "They were victims," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. The cold, sterile environment of the archive seemed to amplify her pain, echoing the emptiness she felt inside. Liam pulled her close, his embrace a haven of warmth and comfort. "We'll find justice for them, Ilara," he murmured, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "We'll uncover the truth, no matter the cost." He held her tightly, his strength a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere of the archive room. The fight was far from over, but in that shared embrace, Ilara found a renewed strength, a shared purpose that transcended their individual struggles. The lavender ink on her fingers, once a symbol of a hidden past, now felt like a mark of solidarity, a promise to break the silence. The unbroken circle, she realized, wasn't just about family. It was about justice, about truth, and about the enduring power of human connection. The air in the small, rented cottage hung thick with the scent of brewing coffee and Ilara's anxieties. Sunlight, weak and watery, filtered through the dusty window panes, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Liam sat opposite her, his brow furrowed in concentration, a sheaf of papers scattered across the worn wooden table. The papers, copies of medical records painstakingly unearthed from the hospital archives, documented a chilling pattern of unexplained miscarriages and stillbirths, all linked to Ilara's wealthy, secretive family. "It's a lot," Ilara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The weight of the evidence pressed down on her, the enormity of the deception slowly sinking in. She traced the edge of a chipped teacup, her gaze distant. The lavender scent of the ring, nestled safely in her pocket, felt almost suffocating now. Liam nodded, his expression grim. "More than a lot, Ilara. It's systematic. They covered it up systematically for decades." He paused, running a hand through his tired face. "And it wasn't just miscarriages. There's evidence suggesting deaths, cover-ups that reached far beyond the hospital walls." A shudder ran through Ilara. The image of the faded photographs, the haunted eyes of her unknown female relatives, burned into her mind. "They were silenced," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. The anger, the fierce rebellion she felt earlier, was now laced with a deep, aching sorrow. "We need to find out why," Liam said, his voice low and firm. He pushed the papers towards her, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering support. "We need to find the missing pieces, Ilara, and we need to expose them." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch was a lifeline, anchoring her to the present amidst the swirling chaos of her family's past. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but she didn't flinch. This wasn't just about her family anymore. This was about justice. This was about giving voice to the silenced women, the forgotten victims. "I'll help you," she said, her voice resolute, despite the tremor still present. The lavender ink on her fingers, a mark of a hidden past, felt different now. It was a brand of purpose, a pledge of commitment. The fight for the truth, for justice, had begun. The unbroken circle wouldn't be broken by deceit and fear anymore. It would be forged anew, in the fires of truth and the enduring power of human connection. The old farmhouse creaked under the weight of the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the tempest in Ilara's soul. Liam, hunched over a worn map spread across the kitchen table, murmured about possible connections between long-dead relatives and the abandoned mining town of Blackwood. The air smelled of wood smoke and fear. Blackwood, Alara whispered, the name sounding like a death knell. The map, covered in faded ink and cryptic notations, felt heavy in her hands. Each faded line represented a life, a secret buried beneath layers of wealth and lies. Liam looked up, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. There's a rumor, a whisper in the old records, a hidden branch of the family, involved in something far more sinister than miscarriages. He paused, his voice thick with apprehension. It's a long shot, but worth investigating. We found mentions of Blackwood in several documents. Alara's breath hitched. The lavender scent of the ring, usually a comfort, now felt like a suffocating weight. She ran a trembling hand through her hair, the strands clinging damply to her skin. The weight of generations of secrets pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. Sinister how? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Liam hesitated. There are suggestions of illegal activities, something involving the mine itself, and the disappearances. His voice trailed off, the unspoken horror hanging heavy in the air. The crackling fire seemed to hiss in agreement. Alara felt a cold dread crawl up her spine. The comforting warmth of the fire was no match for the icy grip of fear. The image of her grandmother's haunted eyes flashed before her. This wasn't just about uncovering a family secret anymore. It was about escaping a legacy of darkness. We have to go, Alara said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a potent mixture of fear and determination. The lavender scent of the ring now felt like a beacon, a reminder of the unbroken circle she was fighting to protect. The storm raged outside, but a new storm, a storm of truth, was brewing within her. The dusty archives of the Blackwood Mining Company felt colder than the storm raging outside. Alara shivered, not just from the chill, but from the weight of the unearthed documents. Liam, ever practical, handed her a steaming mug of something herbal and fragrant. "Try this," he murmured, his voice a low comfort in the cavernous space. The scent of chamomile and something spicy fought against the metallic tang of old paper and forgotten despair. These are death certificates," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. The names, a chilling echo of those on the partially burned hospital files, were linked to Blackwood. Dates clustered around the same period. The cause of death, accident. Each entry felt like a lie, a carefully constructed tombstone for a truth buried deep. Liam traced a finger along a faded entry. Accidents in a mine. Coincidence? I think not. His eyes, usually warm and kind, were shadowed with a grim understanding. He looked at Alara, his gaze searching. "This goes beyond a family secret, Alara. This is a cover-up. A systematic one." Alara's hands, normally deft and sure, trembled as she held the brittle papers. The lavender scent of her ring felt muted, overpowered by the suffocating weight of the evidence. A wave of nausea washed over her, the metallic tang of the archive air suddenly overpowering. She leaned against a crumbling shelf, the wood groaning under her weight, a sound echoing the turmoil within her. "My grandmother, she knew," Alara breathed, her voice barely audible. The memory of her grandmother's haunted eyes flooded back, a sharp, physical pain. She knew and she couldn't, or wouldn't, tell me. The years of estrangement, the unanswered questions, the unspoken resentments, now coalesced into a crushing grief. Liam placed a comforting hand on her arm, his touch gentle but firm. "It's okay to grieve, Alara, to be angry, but don't let this break you. We'll expose them. We'll get to the truth." His words, though intended as reassurance, only partially calmed her. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears and mounting determination. The documents felt less like evidence and more like weapons. Weapons they would use to fight for the truth, for the silenced voices buried in Blackwood's dark earth, for the memory of her grandmother. The storm outside seemed to abate slightly, but the storm within Alara was only just beginning. The fight was far from over. The circle remained unbroken, but it was time to rewrite its story. The Blackwood Mining Company's opulent boardroom, a stark contrast to the dusty archives, hummed with nervous energy. Julian, impeccably dressed, paced like a caged predator. Alara and Liam stood before him, a small island of defiance in a sea of polished mahogany. Sunlight glinted off the rows of stern faces behind Julian, each a silent testament to the family's power. "You've made a terrible mistake," Julian hissed, his voice a low growl. The scent of his expensive cologne couldn't mask the underlying bitterness. This charade ends now." Alara, her hand clutching the antique ring, felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a righteous anger. "Charade? These are death certificates, Mr. Thorne. People died. Your family silenced them." Her voice, though trembling slightly, held a newfound strength. Liam, his gaze unwavering, stepped forward. "We have evidence, Mr. Thorne. Enough to bring this entire operation crashing down." The metallic scent of fear hung in the air, a counterpoint to the rich aroma of the expensive leather chairs. Julian's face contorted with rage. He slammed his fist on the mahogany table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "You will regret this," he spat, his eyes blazing. "This will ruin you both." The threat hung heavy, a tangible weight in the air. But Alara and Liam stood firm, their shared determination a silent promise. The weight of the truth, the weight of the dead, spurred them on. The fear remained, but it was no longer paralyzing. It fueled them. The fight for justice had begun. The unbroken circle, once a symbol of oppression, was now becoming a weapon. The press conference scheduled for the following day would be their battleground. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed, blindingly bright, reflecting off the polished surface of the microphones. Alara, her hands still trembling slightly but her posture firm, felt a wave of nausea. The weight of the past, the weight of the truth pressed down on her. Liam squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance that anchored her. His hand was warm, a comforting contrast to the cold dread clenching her heart. Julian arrived, a whirlwind of tailored suit and controlled fury. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were now shadowed with a desperate kind of anger. He didn't look like a man who expected to win. "This is a smear campaign," he barked, his voice echoing through the room. "A desperate attempt to regain control. Fabricated lies to destroy a family's name." Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, a counterpoint to his bluster. "These aren't lies, Mr. Thorne. These are documents. Birth certificates, medical records, death certificates. People died because of your family's greed and deceit. My grandmother, she suffered because of it." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held steady, her gaze unwavering. Liam presented the evidence, meticulously organized files, photographic proof, irrefutable testimony. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of revelation. The camera lenses, once focused on Julian's indignant face, now turned to Alara, capturing the mix of grief and triumph in her eyes. Julian, cornered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, tried to interject, but the tide had turned. The journalists, sensing the story of the century, peppered him with questions, their words sharp as knives. His carefully crafted denials fell flat, swallowed by the weight of the evidence. Later, in the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the comforting chaos of supportive friends and newfound allies, Alara finally allowed herself to cry. Liam held her close, whispering words of comfort. The weight of the past didn't disappear, but it felt lighter now, shared, understood. The ring, resting on her finger, no longer felt like a burden, but a symbol of resilience, a testament to a truth finally revealed. The unbroken circle was complete, its meaning redefined, not by power and secrecy but by courage and truth. The courtroom hummed, a low thrum of hushed whispers and nervous coughs. Sunlight, slanted through the tall, arched windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Alara sat beside Liam, his hand a comforting weight in hers. Her own hands, usually nimble with paintbrushes, felt clumsy and stiff. The The scent of old paper and polished wood filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the sterile smell of the hospital archives where their journey began. Julian Thorne, impeccably dressed despite the storm brewing around him, paced before the judge. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands, the desperation in his eyes. "This is a malicious fabrication," he snarled, his voice a brittle counterpoint to the quiet tension in the room. "A calculated attack on my family's reputation." Alara met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a controlled fury that surprised even herself. The years of suppressing her grandmother's story, the fear, the uncertainty, it all coalesced into a powerful resolve. "My grandmother suffered, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice low but steady, each word carrying the weight of generations of secrets. "And countless others, silenced by your family's greed." Liam, his face pale but resolute, placed a file on the table, a stack of meticulously organized documents. The rustle of paper in the suffocating silence seemed deafening. Each document was a testament to years of painstaking research, each page a blow against the Thorne family's carefully constructed facade. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward, her gaze sweeping over the evidence. The weight of the accusations hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the humidity of a summer storm. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, broken only by the erratic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Time, Alara realized, had a strange way of revealing truth, even if it took decades to surface. The truth, it seemed, was a powerful solvent, dissolving the carefully built wall of deceit Julian had erected around his family's legacy. His carefully chosen words, his haughty demeanor, all crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. His carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation, was dissolving before his eyes, revealing the man beneath. Broken, exposed, and ultimately defeated. The unbroken circle was finally complete, not by a deceptive web of lies, but by a courageous quest for truth. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of whispered anxieties. Sunlight, fractured by the stained glass window, painted shifting mosaics on the polished mahogany. Alara, her hand clasped tightly in Liam's, felt a tremor run through her. The scent of aged legal documents, sharp and slightly acrid, filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the sweet floral perfume she usually wore. Julian Thorne, his expensive suit unable to mask the sweat beading on his forehead, stood rigid before the judge. His voice, usually a smooth baritone, was now a strained rasp. "This is a smear campaign," he protested, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "A blatant attempt to tarnish the Thorne name." Alara's gaze locked with his. Years of suppressed fury, of quiet desperation, surged within her. The fear, once a paralyzing weight, had hardened into resolve. "My grandmother's suffering," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "And the suffering of others is not a campaign, Mr. Thorne. It is the truth." Liam, his face pale but resolute, slid a thick file across the table. The rustle of its pages cut through the suffocating silence, a counterpoint to the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock. Each document, a painstakingly researched piece of the puzzle, chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of the Thorne family's legacy. The judge, her expression unreadable, adjusted her glasses, her gaze lingering on the evidence. The weight of unspoken accusations hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like a summer storm. A single tear traced a path down Alara's cheek, a testament to the years of pain and the courage it took to finally speak. Liam squeezed her hand, his silent support a balm to her raw emotions. The moment stretched, a breathless pause before the storm broke. The truth, long buried, was finally seeing the light of day. The unbroken circle was closing, not with lies and deception, but with a hard-won victory. The courtroom air, thick with tension, hummed with a low, almost palpable energy. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slicing through the high, arched windows. Liam, his hand still clasped tightly in Alara's, felt the tremor in her fingers mirroring his own. He'd spent sleepless nights poring over documents, his initial trepidation replaced by a fierce determination. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise of unwavering support. The judge, her face impassive, tapped a pen against the polished wood of her desk. The sound echoed in the sudden hush, a stark counterpoint to the frantic beat of Liam's heart. Julian, his carefully constructed composure crumbling, shifted his weight. His expensive suit suddenly looking ill-fitting, almost comical in its inability to disguise his distress. "This is a travesty," Julian rasped, his voice cracking under the weight of the accusations. "My family's reputation is being destroyed." Alara, her eyes blazing with righteous anger, met his gaze head-on. "Your reputation," she said, her voice clear and strong, "was built on lies and the suffering of others. My grandmother, and countless others, paid the price for your family's greed. The years of suppressed rage, of quiet desperation, finally found their voice.